What's up, Jay? How you doing today?
Risky, what is happening? It's the end of the year. And this is it, buddy, for the year.
Yes,
well,
it
let's
is.
get going.
This is Golf Nation, the show that brings you interviews with the best and brightest people in the industry. Join us for a round as we learn about their life, business, and so much more. Golf isn't just about playing the game, it's about connecting with others and getting away from our everyday lives. Now here's your host and the CEO of GolfCritique.com, Jeremy Lee.
Golf Nation, great to be back with you, man. You're listening to episode 52 of the Golf Nation podcast, and it's the season finale. The last one of the year before we take a little Christmas break. Should be a lot of fun. But as always, Golf Nation podcast is brought to you by GolfCritique.com, the best search engine in golf. And Risky, it's been a great year, man.
It has.
It's been a productive year, like you said.
Right.
We've had to deal with some things. Everybody's had to deal with a wild 2020.
Mm-hmm.
We got COVID. We got all kinds of different things happening. But thank goodness golf is still booming. Golf is still where it needs to be. So if you're looking to find a great place to go find golf courses, pay no booking fees, find great instructors, maybe book a trip, GolfCritique.com is your place to go. Completely free. And when you become a member, even a free member, you get into our $25,000 giveaway and a trip to come see us here in Pinehurst, play a little bit of golf. Not too bad for
Can't wait
searching and getting no booking fees. Hey, all kinds of, we're up to 7,000 courses worldwide now with no booking fees, and we have over 20,000 golf courses on the search engine for you to find. So really exciting stuff going into 2021. And some other new programs coming out as well that we're pretty excited about as we continue to go.
Super excited about.
But we are talking architecture today, and I am very, very excited. Our guest today is a 3-time American Junior Golf Association All-American, an NCAA All-American at Oklahoma or University of Oklahoma, a member of the American Society of Golf Course Architects, and has a variety of Best New Course of the Year recognitions, as well as some listings in the top 100 courses in the U.S. We can't wait to dive into all things architecture and see where design is going in the future. Based in Norman, Oklahoma, please help me welcome renowned golf course architect, Mr. Tripp Davis. Tripp, great to have you on the show.
Well, good to be here. I always enjoy talking about architecture and the game. And so it's always fun to do these.
Yeah, no, architecture is very interesting these days because we're talking about so many different things with the, distance. And I can't even imagine how difficult it is as an architect now to decide, am I going to go distance? Am I going to go more in shot shape? Am I going to go with the natural lay of the land? Am I going to try to manipulate the lay of the land to, accompany the new technology that's out there? So we're going to get into all of those things when we're talking about progression of architecture and where it's going in the future. But I see that you're an amazing player. You've had an incredible amateur career. And so I really want to dive into first, hey, how did you get started in the game? We see that you learned early on around age 10. And I did too, but I didn't turn out to be the player that you did. So let's discuss how you became such a good player.
Well, I started in Hogansville, Georgia. I grew up in the Atlanta area, and a lot of my family was from Southwest Georgia, and my uncle was an avid player. I actually had all my uncles on my mom's side were very avid players. And so they took me out when I was about 10. As my mom said, it was to get me out of her hair. And it took. I played a lot of sports. I played basketball, football, all that other stuff, but golf really kind of connected because it was an individual sport. And I didn't, I had a lack of patience. I still have a lack of patience, which serves me well at times, but other times not. But I really liked the individual aspect of it and like being outdoors and so forth. So that's how I got started. It was one of my uncles took me out and I just loved it. So I practiced every day, and I was fortunate to develop some skills to be able to play good junior golf and then get a scholarship and have my school paid for. And but it was just hard work. The kids that that are coming around today, a lot of them, my daughters actually, they're now in their 20s, but when they were younger, I didn't want to push them because I realized when I was a kid, I pushed my parents. And so you've got to want to go out and do it and practice and learn and continue to get better. And it's very, very time consuming. So it takes a unique situation, a unique individual, I think, to put that time in. And, I didn't make it to the PGA Tour. I tried a little bit, but just imagine how gifted and how much time's involved with these guys that do end up playing at the highest of levels.
Yeah, no, I agree. We talk about that a lot on this show. We talk about how good players are today, how good the next generation is, how many 59s we're starting to see out on tour now. And the game has just evolved so dramatically. I feel even since, maybe we contribute Tiger to that effect, is where he just changed the game. People started to train, people started to increase that work ethic a little bit more. And now you just see so many more people that have the potential, which made it even harder to make it to the tour. We tell people all the time, listen, if you can't shoot 64 on your golf course on a regular basis, you have no shot on tour.
Yeah. It's changed dramatically. I remember, when I played on the American Junior Golf Association tour, if you could break 75, you could finish in the top 15, top 20. You'd have to shoot around par to be able to have a chance to win those tournaments. But, I see the scores these kids are shooting today, and we never came close to that. And college golf's the same way. I mean, my senior year, I was an All-American. I think my scoring average was just under 73. That wouldn't crack the top 5 in most top 25 programs anymore. The level of talent out there is amazing.
Yeah, I would agree. And you said something really interesting in your first comment. You said it takes a special individual to really dig in and really drive themselves to make it to the college level. Do you still believe that, today, you went through that experience, it just takes the ultimate grind? Is it based on because you're by yourself so much, just because the work ethic is so hard? What's your thoughts behind that?
Well, that's the one thing is I think for those kids that do end up playing at a high level in college or, get to go to a D1 school and contribute and play, it's not a grind to them. It's what they love.
Mm-hmm.
They're out there practicing, and the more they get to play with better players, both at the, when they're playing junior golf, I think this is, that's part of it, Jeremy, is that it's become cyclical because the more players you get to play, the more good players you get to play with, the better you're going to get, or you're not going to end up playing with those guys much longer. So AJJ Tour, when I was out there, as I'd said, if I'd shoot around par, I had a chance to win. Well, that's not the case anymore. And so when you go out there, you're having to, raise your game.
Mm-hmm.
And to do that, you've got to put in more time. You've got to change your mentality. I liken it a little bit to, when you go from college golf to playing mini tour golf, I think I broke 70 3 times my senior year at Oklahoma. And when I went out to play mini tour stuff, back then it was a lot of state opens. They didn't have the Hogan Tour yet, which is now the Corn Ferry. What is it now? It's the Corn Ferry Tour.
Corn Ferry Tour. Yeah, it's went through a couple of names since the Hogan Tour.
Yeah.
It changes every year, it seems like.
Yeah.
But my first few tournaments out there, I traveled around with Glenn Day and, some of the other guys that, from Oklahoma State. I shot 66 in my first round as a professional and hung around, practiced, and sat up there and tried to figure out what the cut was going to be. And I shot 74 the second day and made the cut by 1. That's the difference in mentality is these kids today, if I'd have shot 74 today in my second round, I'd have missed the cut.
Sure.
And so that's the thing I see is that there's so many more good players that it's a ball rolling downhill. It's getting bigger as it goes. These kids are just getting better and better because they have to compete. Gary Player put it really well one time, and I don't know exactly the quote, but he said something along the lines of we use like 1/10 of our mind capability in playing the game. And that's as much as anything, these kids are learning how to use their mentality better. And it's not so much necessarily mental strength as it is mental aggression.
Sure. Yeah, that's exciting stuff because I was going to wait later on into the show to talk about this, but We kind of feel the same way that you do. Is it's just like a mental grind. It's very hard for some of these kids, but then some of these kids it comes natural. But we feel like burnout or anything else like that has kept a lot of those kids that were really, really, really good. And the competition could be even more better. I know so many kids that got to high school that were unbelievable players, but just lost interest because it's just been, it had been a grind their whole life. And so next year in 2021, we're introducing Club League USA, and it's actually the first travel team golf league across America and Canada that is going to allow kids to compete competitively as a team all the way through a national championship. It's for the private clubs, the private club network, and they're basically representing their clubs all the way here in Pinehurst next November to play for a national championship. So what we hope is, where it's a grind by yourself, maybe now that they have other kids, they're working together as a team, they're focused on each other. We don't have any age or gender restrictions. And so it's really based on competitiveness and skill, and clubs get to rank their players. And then so they're going to interact with boys and girls. They're going to interact between, anywhere from 8 to 15-year-olds. And so what we hope is there's a lot of mentorship, a lot of motivation, maybe even some humility. A 15-year-old goes out there and gets beat by a 10-year-old. It's going to, make them think twice. But
that'll happen.
No question about it. There's unbelievable players out there.
I think you hit one of the things you hit the nail on the head on one thing, Jeremy, and that it's not only for getting these kids to play at a high level, it's also to get kids to just want to play the game. As it relates to playing with their friends, playing in groups. One of the more difficult things with girls is getting enough girls that want to play and practice with each other and go out. That's a barrier to growing the game is getting these groups, these teams. I think what you're doing is outstanding because that's going to make more people want to play. Now, obviously, some of those kids are going to come out of that with heightened ability because they're playing and practicing a good bit. They have the skills to do that. But just in general, in growing the game, that mentality, that approach is great. And I applaud you for that.
Well, thank you very much. That means a lot because, especially from people who are in the industry, who are very good and well known in the industry and have a great playing background. Those are the kind of people that I really is excited that sees the vision of what we're trying to do, because inclusion, I am a father of 4 daughters. So I understand what you're saying about the girls. There's just maybe not enough of them, or, now that they have the option to interact with the boys, there's a lot of good girl players out there. And so we do it. Actually, we take the whole play from your tees, play from the correct tees. And that's how we do it, to where they're basically the same skill level, but they would play from their tees, whether they're both number one. So if a 10-year-old was the number one on one club and or a 10-year-old boy and a 12-year-old female, the female would play from her tees, the boy would play from their tees, and then they would play straight up from that perspective. So it's going to be a lot of fun. It's about the social aspect, mentorships for the highs and the lows, or age groups that are high and age groups that are low. And so it's going to be a lot of fun. We're getting a lot of great feedback from the clubs across America. So we hope to have about 300 teams across America and Canada for 2021 season. So really, really exciting stuff, and definitely would love to get your opinion as we get through the season with you having so much experience in the collegiate high school games. So moving forward, we want to jump into really your collegiate experience. How was it playing collegiate golf with the University of Oklahoma? And what made you kind of jump into architecture, and what led you to a path of not pursuing professionally and moving more into the architecture role?
Well, I came to, growing up in Georgia, going to the University of Oklahoma, really going out of the state was kind of interesting because Georgia Tech was really good at the time. Georgia has always had a good program, and I took recruiting trips to Georgia Tech, North Carolina, Florida, and Oklahoma. Oklahoma was a little bit of an outlier, but the coach at the time was a guy named David Yates, who was a really good recruiter. And I wanted to go somewhere where I felt like we were going to win a national championship. When I took my recruiting trip to Georgia Tech, that was probably ended up being my second choice, but they showed me the academic centers and all that. We went into the study hall for the athletes at Georgia Tech, and it looked like the whole athletic department was in there. And when I came to Oklahoma and they showed me around, I said, well, do y'all have a study hall for athletes? And they said, well, we think so. And we went upstairs into this room that they said, on the front it said athletic department study hall, and opened the door and the lights weren't even on. And so I said, this is more my speed than Georgia Tech. But it had more to do with the fact that I thought, and I got a lot of good advice when I was thinking about it, but it gave me a chance to go learn a different type of game because, out here the wind blows, different type of golf courses in some respects. And so when I got to school here, we had Doug Martin. I don't know if you remember that name, but played on tour for a good while, was also a freshman with me. And we had Craig Perks was the other freshman that year. So we had three pretty good players that had come in. And then Todd Hamilton, Grant Waite were the other two. They were I think they were juniors at that time. We were loaded. And so it was difficult. In the middle of my freshman year, I'd played a couple tournaments in the fall and thought about transferring it, because I said, I don't know if I'm ever going to get to play with these guys. And one of my uncles said, you need to stick through it. It's going to make you better. The experience then was very much a team atmosphere, and everybody we all lived together. We practiced together. We did pretty much everything together. And so the older guys tended to bang you on the head if you didn't get out and practice and work on your game. But the college experience at Oklahoma was another thing that I really enjoyed, because the University of Oklahoma it's a very good school, great football, great athletics. I got the full experience in terms of being able to see all of that, do all that. But, playing golf at Oklahoma, we always were trying to be as good as our guys to the north, at Oklahoma State. And that was another motivating factor for us. And that was another thing I looked at when I was looking at schools, was to go somewhere they had a rivalry like that was going to be fun and also, make everybody better. When I got finished with school, I was just good enough to have been an All-American my senior year, but, I didn't hit it particularly well. I was a really good short game guy. So when I tried for a little while to play to play professionally, I was just good enough to kind of keep my head above water. But the second year I played professionally, which it was really about a year and a half into playing professionally, I was at the Oklahoma Open and I had about $5,000 in the bank. I had a 4-foot putt on the last hole to make the cut. And if I missed the cut, I wasn't going to have enough money for sure to enter into tour school. And I made the putt, but went in the clubhouse and puked. And I said, I'm not sure if this is right for me. So I went back to school and got my graduate degree, my master's degree in landscape architecture. And that led to pursuing golf course architecture. And so it's been, it was a fun ride to try to play. I gave it a little bit of a shot. I don't look back with any regrets because I wasn't good enough to make it out there. But I still play a lot of amateur golf, and that has helped me as an architect stay in the game side of things in terms of realizing things like what we just talked about with the kids. And from an architecture perspective, one of the things we work really hard with is to try to build enough tees up front, get enough tees in forward to where those kids have an opportunity to learn the game. It's been a fun ride. I started out not working for anyone. When I got out of grad school, I had a chance to go do a couple of state park courses for the state of Oklahoma or go take a job. I had 3 job offers working for big names, and I decided to do those projects and created a bigger learning curve, but the mistakes were my own. I found that for me, that made them hit home a little better.
Yeah, that's interesting to get that kind of opportunity right out of college.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Was that just the right place at the right time, or was that a connection?
That was a connection. And the state of Oklahoma, the golf courses they have are they're mid-level, as far as state park courses go. One of the projects was a 9-hole addition, and the other one was a new 9-hole course. They also had an 18-hole new course project that they were hiring an architect for. But a friend of mine was on the board of governors for the state of Oklahoma Architecture Committee or board. And he knew some people, and he and I actually kind of teamed together to go into to look at them. So it was definitely connection based. And the interesting thing is I look back and, I wasn't really scared about it. I had a good mentality that we're going to go create the play of the game. And that's what we focused on was doing little things, subtle things that made it more interesting. I'm still learning on almost 30 years later about the technical side of golf course construction, because it's not like anything else. It changes on a fairly regular basis. So you're always having to learn. But when I first started out, I knew water ran downhill, and that was about it technically.
Well, when you're planning designs, let's get into, when you have a clean slate or when you're doing a renovation, what are you first looking for when you go into designs, and how does that mold you to where you get a completed project?
Well, the first thing you really, with either one, is you want to identify what your client's objectives are. And so that's going to drive a good bit of what you develop from a theme standpoint, what your design criteria is going to be. And for the most part, from that point on, you have creative freedom to do a lot of different things. But, for instance, if you're working with a project that, if you're going to do a new course that is going to be largely resort oriented, you've got two different ways you can go with that. One is you build it to where it's a golf course that might be fairly difficult, very visual, but the average player is not going to play there that often, and they get to enjoy the experience of seeing how well they can do on something more difficult. Or you do something that's more playable. It's going to cater towards fun more than difficulty. And we've seen a big move in the game towards more enjoyable. And I think that's good, because it allows more players to enjoy playing the game. I try to make sure that when we do that, we still include some level of strategy. You have to think your way around the golf course to play it well. You don't necessarily have to think your way around it to play it. And I've never really been a penal style of architect that looks at a project and, wants to make it excessively difficult. We've had a couple of projects where that was the intent. The client, when we redid Oak Tree in Oklahoma, the intent was to get another major event. And most of the work we do, the general approach to begin with is to look at how you're going to use the land, how you're going to work with the land, and then how are you going to be able to mold interesting, subtle, strategic things into, whether it's a new property or into a renovation. And then when you're doing restoration, it's a little bit different, because you're trying to figure out, to some extent, and or to a large extent, what the original architect intended, and try to fit that into the modern game strategically. And so I think that's one advantage I've had in having been around the game for so long and played it at a reasonably high level, is understanding the nuances of strategic golf. And that was, as I mentioned, I wasn't a great ball striker when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. So I had to think my way around a lot more. I had to understand the complexities around a green, for example. So you'll find that in most of my golf courses is a lot of strategy and a lot of interesting stuff around the greens.
That's interesting. So is that kind of like your signature, is green complexes, or do you have another thing that's kind of consistent among all your designs out there?
I think one of the consistencies in our work, Jeremy, is there is no consistency.
There you go.
We've generally, every project that we've had a chance to do, we've never really gone into a project with the same criteria, with the same piece of property, with the same style objectives. And that fit to a large extent the way I came up in the business, because I didn't go work for someone who had a style. Every project I was doing, had a little bit of different nature to it. And so I was trying to rework something, trying to make something look a little different, play a little different. So it's helped in our restoration, because most of what we do is historic restoration of some sort. Mm-hmm. And so you're having to adapt to styles as you go along. Whether it's Ross, it's Rayner, Tillinghast, Perry Maxwell, they all had slightly different styles, and or they used different styles on that particular golf course. And so you're having to adapt. And that's what we try to do with every project. Instead of going to everything we do and try to just refine what we've done before, we try to do something a little different everywhere we go.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I mean, I'm looking at your resume. I mean, you're talking about 19 original designs. You got 57 renovations or restorations. Is there any one of those that are your favorites? Maybe a couple favorites that you think that people have got to play out there that you just say, this was one of the best projects I've ever been on. This turned out amazing.
Well, you've got 4 daughters.
Mm-hmm.
So you know that none of them are your favorites, or at least you're going to definitely act that way.
You're right.
So, it's just differences of experiences. I got to do one of the first things I ever did in my career was do a little 9-hole golf course in Kingfisher, Oklahoma. And we had no budget to speak of. We had to use the city water department to put in drainage and irrigation. Everything I did was, I couldn't move a lot of dirt. So it was all about little subtleties in making the game fun to play. I went back and played there not long ago, and that was 25 years ago. And I look back, and it almost kind of reminded me of that initial love of those little details. When you're doing a $9 million renovation these days, there's a lot of moving parts, and you have to make time to pay attention to those little subtle details that really make things work. So every project we've done has been a little bit different in that regard. I mean, we got to do a new course for the Fairmont Hotel in Acapulco, basically taking one of their older courses and some additional land and building a new golf course, all on sand right near the ocean. We didn't have any holes right on the ocean, but you got to stay in a Fairmont hotel every time you went for a site visit. That was pretty cool. So every experience is a little different. We got to redo Preston Trail in Dallas, which is a really great old classic golf course, neat membership, and they take incredible care of it. So everything's been a little different, but I thought it might be kind of fun to take potential clients to some of my early work too, where we had no budget. They still have no budget. And explain to them the little subtle details and how that love of what you're doing really carries through.
Do you ever find that what the client wants and what they need is two different things?
Yes, on a daily basis. And that's one thing I will tell any client that we're, potential client we're talking to is I'm going to tell you what you need to hear, not necessarily what you want to hear. Mm-hmm. And part of the process of being able to do good work is being able to get your clients to understand what they need and what's going to make them successful or what's going to make them proud of what we've all done. It may take a little bit of a different approach than they're thinking. It's not necessarily a global approach. It's more of little things. And I think your best architects in our business are the ones that are able to help mold their clients' approach, thinking to where they produce something pretty interesting. Gil Hans is a friend of mine, and Gil is probably as good as anybody I've ever been around at being able to get his clients to see what really is going to be great and work. And that's what we have to do. We have to mold our client into thinking in the right ways. And you have to be open to collaboration with them too. You can't come in and say, this is exactly what I want to do. Just give me the keys, go away and come back and we'll open it. And can't take that approach. You have to be collaborative in nature. And it works too, because in a lot of ways, and it's especially when I'm doing renovation work, we'll have one of the, 20 handicap lady that ends up on our committee that comes up with a great idea. So you have to be open to listening to what they have to say, and you have to be capable of explaining to them why an idea may not work right.
Yeah, early on in my career, I was very fortunate. I actually started off as a superintendent before I was a golf professional, and so I got to build two Trump courses up in New York and New Jersey, and so I got to see your world firsthand. From a fresh build to a renovation build, or it really wasn't even a renovation. It was a complete, they just used the land. It was a golf course before, but it looked nothing like it. But I got to work for the Fazio group, and as I'm looking at different designs and seeing what Gil's doing and different things, in my mind, I'm looking at clients really have to think about what they want perceived, even down to what water is available. And I think that a lot of people miss that point is, hey, if I want an Augusta golf course, I got to think about irrigation too. And sometimes they don't think about that. And I think what Gil has been doing, going more of the natural way to where, even single or double row irrigation is plenty, and which is helping on water conservation, different things like that. Is that things that you think about, especially as we go into the future, as water is such a prevalent thing that we're going to be looking at in the coming years?
Well, water is one element, and you touch on that portion of looking at how that's going to impact style and playability. Every project we work on, there's going to be criteria that comes outside of either me or the client from an environmental perspective and or a regulatory perspective. Environment and regulatory don't always are always the same thing. We're looking at projects right now where the Army Corps of Engineers is going to have a big impact on what we can do. Water availability, water quality are very important as well. You get a great point there that if you're at a golf course or you're looking at a new course and the water quality is not very good, but they want to use bent grass on greens, you may have to explain that doesn't really fit with the resources you have. So every project is a little bit different in that way. And the client too, Gil's done plenty of renovations that didn't involve a lot of naturalism because he's working at a place that's more parkland in nature and has always been more parkland in nature. I'm the same way. I mean, we've got clients, we did Spring Lake up on the Jersey Shore that we've taken more back to a seaside looking golf course, a lot more fine fescue native areas, reducing the water usage, and so forth. And water usage as a criteria is not going to, that's going to end up being a significant factor in certain environments. Working in Palm Springs, which we're going to start a project there in 2022. Interestingly enough, there, water is not as big of an issue as you'd think it would be, but it could be down the road. So you have to understand what may happen in the future. It's so varied from location to location, though, Jeremy, that there's not one right way. There's not a movement in golf course architecture that's going to fit every specific client or every specific environment that we're working with. But the one constant is knowing what you're working with before you start design. That's not only your client's objectives, but the site, the water quality, endangered species often becomes an issue. Archaeology becomes an issue. So it's about understanding what you're working with. And I'm a big fan of not developing a whole lot of preconceived notions or ideas about what we may end up with before we know what we're working with.
Yeah, I always see, I have a great respect for architects because in my mind, I'm thinking, gosh, if I did like 20 courses, there would be, my courses would look a lot, there's only so many ways that you can design a golf hole. It's just like, man, do I get, how do I differentiate myself? Do you find that difficult sometimes that you kind of, one project to another, it kind of almost not the same design as a whole, but you're designing kind of the same hole and you're like, oh, it just frustrates me. I want it different. I want it because that looked like a hole on another course. Or, do you want to differentiate all 18 holes or do you still keep some sort of those aspects together?
Well, I think there's some principles that apply from course to course. Again, water moves downhill. You have to deal with that. There are some basic principles. I think it's good to have basic principles in mind with what, and let them fit the project that you're working on. For instance, if one of your themes or principles on a specific project is going to be playability, that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be an easy golf course for the better player, but playability may be a theme that you're working with. And so every hole that you're going to work on, every shot that you're going to work on, the good thing about architecture and keeping it different is that it's rare to work on a piece of property, or whether it's a renovation or a new golf course, where they look the same or they present the same opportunities. And the more varied you are with thinking about how something could work, instead of sticking to, well, this works, I know this works, the better, more varied your architecture is going to be. We've seen that over time where architects kind of have a way about doing things, and you can see it from one course to the next, stylistically, strategically, from a challenge perspective. But the better architects out there, the Tillinghast, the Perry Maxwell, Seth Rayner. Seth Rayner was a little bit more of a template guy, but he presented it differently from course to course. And then in the modern era, we've got a lot of guys that are really focused on being a bit different. And I applaud that. Sometimes that's going to lead to walking that fine line and you fall off on the wrong side of that fence and it doesn't play well, or it's too easy or it's too hard, one or the other. But I think you got to walk a fine line towards that to make sure that your work is varied. Because one of the things that's great about the game is being able to tee it up on a golf course and see something different one day and then go to another golf course and see something different the next day. You want to have that variability. Now, I will tell you that in the same golf course, I'm a proponent and I like to think of having common themes. I wouldn't want to blend too many different styles or strategies in the same golf course. But it's not that difficult, really, if you work with the land, you work with what you're given, and you allow those things to have an impact on style and strategy.
Yeah, have you ever had, that course that you designed and you're like, "Oh, crap, I made that hole way too hard." Has you ever had that situation where, like, that green is way too much undulation or we should have softened that a little bit?
I've, yeah, I've done a few of those. And and that's the interesting thing, is I was always more about subtle stuff. I
Uh-huh.
really was a big fan of subtle movement in the ground, and so I didn't get that too far away. You see a lot of the modern architects, especially, that are doing stuff that's pretty severe
Mhm.
in places, and if you don't provide options to avoid that, the severe nature of a shot or a hole, it can be a bit too much. I did one green at we did a golf course in Tulsa. It was going to be a part of a casino there, and it was an old Perry Maxwell course at one time. And so that was kind of the theme, was to use Perry style and his theme of rolling greens and so forth. And it was a rocky site, and we got on seventh green, and it was a really cool par five that has a creek that bisects the fairway and some neat rock outcroppings. And where I wanted to put the green had some rock, and we chiseled away at it a little bit. And I thought to myself, it'll be okay if this green's a bit severe. Only green I've ever had to go back and rebuild, because it was too much. I mean, you had to hit your shot into the green in the perfect spot to have it not only get near the hole, but just stay on the dang green.
Yeah,
uh,
it can be tough
but for
sometimes.
the most part, if you're aware of that and you're aware of giving them options to, other ways to play the hole where they can avoid that severe nature, or what I call small margins for error. If you can provide a wider margin for error at the same time, you generally are not going to run into having to rebuild stuff.
So you said that the only constant throughout your designs is nothing is constant. Is there any way somebody could see a photo of one of your designs and immediately pick it out as, yeah, this is a Tripp Davis design?
I think that there's probably some bunkering that we've done that I think you go from one course to the next and see a little bit. And part of that's because we, redone a lot of Tillinghast. We've redone a lot of Perry Maxwell, and redone a couple of Rayner projects where you're going to see some consistencies there. Some of that gets then attributed to the original architect. In the original designs that we've done, there's probably a little bit of bunkering. I'm a big fan of more naturalistic bunkering. If you've ever driven along the road and you see where they cut the road into a hillside, and you see the over on the hillside that's eroded, you see the little in your part of the world, you see that a lot, where
Right.
roadside banks have eroded a little bit, and they leave this little lacy edge up on the top.
Mm-hmm.
That's natural, and I try to do that on our original stuff more so than other types of things. But it varies with the grass types too. It varies with the environmental conditions. Like, for instance, the same lacy type of bunker or naturalistic type of bunker that we did in Acapulco is very different from one we did at Old American in Dallas, where they just played the ladies event this weekend. They're going to vary a little bit, but I think you'll see some consistencies, if anything, in bunkering on a few of the things we've done. Greens, you wouldn't be able to tell. They're all very different from within the same golf course. I don't think and that's kind of hard. There's a few architects where I walk up on greens and I can say, I know who that is
Mm-hmm.
on greens, but greens are a little bit more difficult to pinpoint that way. But bunkering, you'll see a lot of guys. Gil, for example, very similar style of bunkering on a lot of the stuff he does, because from a new course perspective, that's a lot of the theming that he does. But at the same time, you go from course to course that he's done, and you're going to see some differences. Some bunkering may be a little bit more grass face, some may be a little bit higher sand lines, the type of grass around the edges of the bunkers. We all have those little differences that we have to deal with, but bunkering is probably where you're going to see some more commonality.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because I
Yeah.
would say here, Ross, that would probably be one of the very easy greens to pick out that it was a Ross design because he was so into
Mhm.
the tabletop designs. Maybe Tillinghast with the big, huge face bunkers, around the greens. A lot of bunkering around the greens. So, it's hard. There's so many varieties and so many so many ways to design a golf course that golf courses become so unique in so
Mhm.
many different ways. But after the break, I want to really kind of get into the future of architecture.
Meet Matt, an avid golfer who just got a receipt from a golf course and is ready to experience the unique benefits of golfcritique.com. He pulls out his receipt, scans the code, visits the course page to review, creates an account, enters information, and is deciding on membership of his choice. You can join golfcritique.com as a free member to book on partner courses, lessons with incredible instructors, and your next buddies trip at great resorts around the world without any booking fees. Upgrade to a premium membership and receive access to all perks worldwide from our esteemed partners. Review a partner and get $5 off your next visit. Not only that, enjoy member experiences with brand ambassadors, exclusive tournament offers, special incentives from our title sponsors, and awesome giveaways. GolfCritique.com gives more back to the golfer and to the partner than any other platform in golf, making sure you have the best experience every visit. Check out our blogs, videos, and podcasts on Golf Hub. All golf, all the time. So what are you waiting for? Matt has already chosen the premium membership, and now you can do the same by creating a golfer account at golfcritique.com today. GolfCritique.com, the best search engine in golf.
All right, Golf Nation, welcome back. We are talking with architect Tripp Davis, and we are very, very excited to get into the future of golf course architecture and how they are dealing with, really the length of the game. I mean, I guess that's really what we're coming down to is how are we dealing with the length of the game? Are architectures or architects going to have a really big impact in, no, we're not going to go 8,000 yards, or are we going to be saying, okay, we've got to figure out different ways to change the game and bring back technology? So, Tripp, let's dive right into it, and let's get your opinion on technology and how it's affecting architecture, particularly.
Well, it's a vast subject. I mean, and in general, one of the ways that I look at it is that, especially on the PGA Tour. And that's really what we're talking about for the most part is how length and technologies change the way that the best players in the world are playing the game. But I am a believer in that the players are going to play the equipment. They're going to tailor their equipment. They're going to tailor their games to be able to best suit the test that they're given on a regular basis.
Right.
And so if you're giving them something that's going to allow Bryson DeChambeau's approach to work, they're going to do that. If you're not requiring them to work the ball, if you're not requiring them to be more precise off the tee, if they're not having to think as much about where they're placing shots into greens, they're going to build their games around doing that to some extent. So I think, a lot of people think that the manufacturer or, the regulating bodies, the USGA and the RNA, really need to do things to roll the ball back. And, quite frankly, I don't really know where I stand on that because I think there's so many complexities as to how it's going to impact, and a lot of them probably being unintended consequences. That's a very, very difficult subject. And one of the reasons why the RNA and the USGA have, in some respects, kicked it down the road pretty much every year here in the last 10, 15 years, and talking about it. But I do believe that architecture has a role that it could play. If you're, for instance, let's just think of it this way. The 10th hole at Riviera in Los Angeles, where they play the LA Open or whatever they call it these days, the Genesis Open or whatever it may be, that hole is a little bit over 300 yards long, great complexities from a strategy standpoint. Length is really not that big of a factor on the hole. And in some way, shape, or form, you take that type of architecture, and if you really wanted to, you could build a golf course that's 6,500 yards long that has nothing to do with length. Length would not be the advantage on playing the golf course. We could do that with architecture. The other side of that is to value length as a greater skill than other skills that players can have in the game. In large measure, you're accommodating length. So we're seeing golf courses that I think, drawing a blank, Medina, I think it was 2 years ago when Justin, I'm drawing a blank on names this morning, but Justin Thomas shot like 24 under par on a 7,800 yard long golf course. But at the same time, when they played Marion in the Open, what was that, 3-4 years ago?
Mm-hmm.
I think, was it 1 or 2 under par, one or even par, right around there, one. Architecture can play a role in determining what skills are valued and how that then impacts length. And I think, I hate to be overly critical, but architecture basically didn't do that. We've continued to build really, really long golf courses for those guys. And the thing that I'm concerned about as it relates to the rest of the game, and I saw this, we redid a golf course in Dallas called Northwood, great old club there. I was out riding around not long after it opened, and we came across a group of about 5 guys that were probably all in their 20s, and every single one of them swung as hard as they could, and not a single one of them hit the fairway. And so I said, I want to watch these guys for a couple of holes. And that's the way they played the game. And that concerns me because that's not the beauty of the game, in my opinion. And I might be, considered traditional or old school, but the beauty of the game is working your way around the golf course and positioning yourself to score the best you can in the way that you can. And we're building golf courses that are encouraging, I think, players to just hit it as far as they can, go find it and hit it again. I don't know what you guys think, but that's, to me, not great golf. And I'd rather see players be conditioned to have to think their way around. And I was encouraged by the way I saw Dustin Johnson play Augusta this year to some extent, because he didn't take driver on 13 and try to just knock it around the corner. He hit 3-wood, I think, there every day. He was hitting 3-wood off of 10, which a lot of players have always done, but so you can work the ball right to left more there. But, he definitely had some holes where he was hitting pitching wedge into some holes that mere mortals couldn't, but he really played the golf course. Bryson DeChambeau doesn't play the golf course, in my opinion. What he's doing is just playing point A to point B as quick as he can. Golf course doesn't really matter with the approach that he takes. Every golf course that, he's just going to go hit it as far as he can, go find it and try to get it in the hole as quick as he can. Some golf courses are going to allow that to happen. Others won't. And I think the great thing in the game of golf, your best players are ones that can adapt the way they approach the golf course to be able to beat that particular course. So that's kind of where I fall. And I know I kind of jumped around on a number of different things there, but I generally don't think that rolling the ball back, I think there's too many unintended consequences that are going to happen from that aren't good. And, starting with the fact that if you roll the ball back and you've still got these 27-year-olds that are standing on the tee, swinging at it as hard as they can. If you put a ball out there with more spin and you got a kid trying to swing at it 115 miles an hour and he has no clue where it's going, that ball's going further offline. Mm-hmm. And not only that, then you get into the sale of equipment. If the players on the tour are playing, knowingly playing, if we have bifurcation, basically, I think it hurts, the manufacturers to some extent, or it could. I think there's too many things out there that we just don't know enough about that, equipment and rolling back equipment could lead to some things that we don't want to see. Whereas architecture, I think we can do as much or more. What do you guys think?
Yeah, no, I think that's all great points. And I love that you brought up Dustin Johnson, because I really never thought that Dustin would win a Masters, because he cuts the ball and it's a draw golf course for the most part. A lot of the big holes out on Augusta are played right to left. It's exactly what you just said. He dialed back, because if he would have hit driver on 10, 13, 2 maybe, he probably would have been in positions where he would have been pitching out of the woods, because he would have just hit through the bend, and he couldn't have played the draw around the hole, because he predominantly plays a cut. I don't even know if I've ever seen him play a draw. And so I never thought that he would win at Augusta, but you hit the nail on the head right there. And you just said, listen, he did what he needed to do to adjust on those holes, to where if he would have hit a driver there, he would have been through the fairway. And that would have put him out of position. So I should have thought about that. And I didn't even realize before you said that he dialed back on those holes. So that makes a lot of sense on why he did very well this year, and man, really played spectacular golf. His run this year has just been out of control. Yeah. One of the best in the game ever, I think, in this run that he's been doing. So the second point is, from an architecture standpoint, If we look back in the day, I mean, when these golf courses were built, especially, Tillinghast and Rayner and all those guys, the ball wasn't flying that far. So a lot of the fairway bunkering was more the 200 to 250 range, where now do we see with architects, we can move those bunkering now more to the 300 to 310, maybe 280 to 320 range, where now, yeah, you can hit it that far, but now those bunkers are going to come into play, and that's going to affect the width of the fairway, or that's going to affect how well you play this golf course.
Well, I think some of that is lengthening the hole to where the bunkers then come into play again. Some of it is in places where you can't lengthen the hole. It's pushing the bunkers out. It goes back to restoring design intent, and the original way that those holes were meant to be played. I think to some extent we oftentimes will grab length wherever we can, no matter what. And I think it makes some holes worse. I'm not a huge fan of like what they did to number 7 at Augusta, where they made it, 450. It used to be like 350.
Mm-hmm.
It was a hole where the average length player had the ability to use their strengths to beat, to play that hole better than the longer players did. So a golf course that has balance allows the longer players to use length as an advantage at times, but then on other holes doesn't allow that length to be an advantage, and in some way, shape, or form may also then give a Justin Leonard type player who's more precise the ability to use his strengths on that particular hole. If you have a golf course and that no one particular strength is going to dominate the golf course or be a greater valued skill, as I like to put it, that's the type of design that we need to think about more so than extending length. A good way of looking at it is if we played Harbor Town and we played Colonial every week on tour, do you think the guys would be using the equipment they are? They'd be building their games the way they have? I don't think so. I think you wouldn't be able to play Harbor Town with a bomb and gouge mentality. You can't really play Colonial that way. There's other golf courses. I love TPC Sawgrass in that regard. You can debate the architecture all you want, the style and so forth, but the substance of that golf course strategically doesn't allow any one type of player to really dominate. And that's why over the years, you've seen, they've lengthened it some, but you've seen all types of players win there. And I think that's what suggests, is good architecture. And when you have basically eliminated the ability for the average length player on tour to consistently compete, it's gone too far.
Yeah, and you said something very interesting too at the top. You said we're really just talking about the PGA Tour. We're just talking about the best players in the world. Kind of came to reality check for me, because I'm like, why does it really impact the game like we think it impacts the game? Because the PGA Tour is like the top 1% of players. So we're changing the entire game for the top 1% of players that can hit it those distances. The average amateur player cannot hit 300-yard drives. I mean, it's still probably playing the same way it used to play for the average amateur. So should we really even be changing these golf courses, or should we just say, listen, maybe we change the tour level, those golf courses, renovate them to fit them, but the rest of these golf courses, do we really need to change them?
Well, from a length perspective, no. I mean, in my practice as an architect, I work on, for instance, we still work with Oak Tree, looking at how we can get that ready for major events. We have some other clients that we work with that are wanting to host state amateurs and things like that. But the overwhelming majority of the work that I do is based on making it fun and enjoyable for the rest of the game. And it's an interesting thing that we run into, because some clubs we work with get it. Some clubs that we work with think that tough or difficult equals good. And that's not the case. Good golf course architecture doesn't need to be difficult to be good. There are definitely golf courses that are going to be a better fit for having those major events and so forth. But what I try to, in conversations like this, is to bring out is that we got to be careful at how those things that the PGA Tour are doing, the way players are building their games, the equipment they're playing with, type of approach they're taking to the game, doesn't bleed back into Northwood in Dallas. It doesn't bleed back into Thunderbird, which it never would at Thunderbird because the average age of the member there is like 75. But, you don't want it to become the mentality that the next generation of golfers thinks that I'm going to swing as hard as I can. And we've got to design architecture to accommodate that. And I think that's one of the things that I'm trying to do is to suggest to everyone that good architecture is based on it being interesting, strategic, having the flexibility to set it up in a way that we can ratchet up the challenge with smaller margins for error, but build the golf course fundamentally so that it can be set up on a day-to-day basis where everybody can enjoy it. That's not an impossible level to reach, where a golf course can be really good, a good challenge for a state amateur or a U.S. Open qualifier or whatever it may be. At the same time, 50 weeks, 52 weeks out of the year, or 51 weeks out of the year, it is interesting and fun to play for everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
Flexibility and course setup and the ability to move tees around a little bit, to grow the rough a little bit, firm the greens up a little bit, speed them up a hair, and put hole locations in places that make it a bit more difficult is part of that pliability. But the fundamental part of it needs to be making sure that it's playable for everybody. Fun.
Yeah, no, I agree. And man, all great things. And before we go, I want to just do one more question for you. And that's really the importance of the superintendent to you as an architect during the build or the restoration or renovation, and actually after the point. Do you try to really get on the same page of what's your idea of how this is supposed to play, and the cuts of grass, the differentiating, how the bunkers are supposed to be played, or, are you big into really connecting with that superintendent and getting on the same page so it kind of enhances your designs?
Well, absolutely. There's two different factors there. One is getting really involved with them before you start design, because as I mentioned earlier, design criteria is one of the things that impacts what you're going to design, how you're going to design, and maintainability is one of those factors. Now, some clients want it to be easier to maintain. Some are more concerned with the style and the art, and within reason, they'll figure out how to make that work. But you have to strike a balance there, because if they can't do their job and make you look good, by having the conditions good and presented in the way that you wanted to, then you fail. So getting in touch with that superintendent as a part of the process, they need to be one of the most important collaborators you have in the whole process. But after you leave, one of the things that we've started to do is I write a booklet that I call Design Intent. I go through and talk about what we were trying to accomplish from a design intent perspective and how that relates to maintenance. For instance, did we design a green or a hole where the intent was to be able to run a shot into the green? What did we do in construction to make that possible and make it to where it was not too difficult to maintain that on a regular basis? So this booklet that we put together is something that helps them to understand, helps the membership to understand what we were trying to accomplish. And then we go back on 2 or 3 times a year. It gives me a good chance to go play golf with them as much as anything, but go and look and see how those things are working, tweak things if necessary. For instance, if we designed it, the approaches to a green to be firm and fast, we sand capped it to where it was going to stay drier. We've maybe put drainage in, but 5 years down the road, that isn't working as well. What do? Do we go through and airify more aggressively and top dress more aggressively? All those little things that go into making it capable for them to present the golf course as it was meant to be played, because maintenance and design intent strategically have to work together.
Man, I love that. I mean,
that's super cool.
Definitely unique, because I never saw any type of book like that. And you necessarily don't know exactly how it was intended. Especially, you could even do pin placements on that of, hey, where you intended these pin placements to be on this golf. I mean, I love that approach, because that takes a lot of the questions out of the superintendent of, okay, how was he, did he want 2-inch rough around the greens? Are we moving water easily or kind of holding it back a little bit? So I love that. I've never heard of that before. So kudos to you on that for sure. Well, Risky, another great season.
Yep.
In the books, and we couldn't have ended it. I'm so glad that we got an architect. Tripp Davis, you were phenomenal. So many great points that you made throughout this. We haven't had another architect on the podcast. So what a great way to end season 2. Can't wait to get to know you more. Hopefully we'll be in the same area. We'll have a chance to tee it up. You're definitely going to have to give me a couple of strokes though.
Well, I don't play that much anymore, and I'm getting old. So yeah, I'm going to start I'm going to get some shots. Yeah. But
see, I always say, watch out for those guys.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, that's great stuff. Well, we want to definitely give you the opportunity to let people know how to get in touch with you and book you for a new renovation or a consultation. Can you give them kind of your lay of the land on how they get in touch with you?
Well, the best way to get in touch with me is just through email. It's at Tripp, TRIPP, at TDA, Tripp Davis Associates Golf.net. Or you can just Google my name, and I think our website comes up. Our girls up in Connecticut that handle our public relations do a really good job of making sure that my website looks good and all that other stuff. So that's probably the best way, is either email or just Google, and there's a way to email us from there.
Okay, fantastic. And that website is tdagolf.net. And social media is Tripp_Davis_golf_arc on Instagram, or Tripp Davis on Facebook as well.
All right, Golf Nation, that is all the time we have for today. Make sure you watch the show on Golf Hub. If you're not doing that already, you definitely should be. You can find us on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, and Instagram as @GolfNationPodcast, and on Facebook as @GolfNationPod. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions for Jeremy or myself, send us a DM on Instagram or send an email to golfhub@golfcritique.com, and it'll go straight to me. That's all I got for him, Jay.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much. We'll be back in 2021 with another great season 3 of the Golf Nation podcast. Really appreciate all the support this year. It's been quite the year of 2020, and we hope everybody stays healthy and stays safe out there. Obviously, happy holidays to everyone, and hopefully we ring in a great 2021. And wow, hopefully we have a better 21 than we did 2020. It's been quite the year. But for all of you who picked up the game this year in golf, welcome. It's such a fantastic game, and we hope that lasts for a lifetime. But until then, learn as much as you can, live your life to the fullest, play golf forever. I'm Jeremy Lee for Risky. Thanks again to you, Tripp, for coming on and giving us some great insight into architecture.
Thanks, Tripp.
You bet.
This is the Golf Nation podcast, and we'll see you on the tee.